Imagine being stuck in an elevator with someone way out of your league. What would you say if your only escape was conversation? Before we begin, leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The grandfather clock in the marble lobby chimed midnight, its resonant tone echoing through the empty corridors of the Meridian Tower like a funeral bell. Clara Martinez pushed her industrial mop bucket across the pristine marble floor, the wheels squeaking so loudly in the 50-story luxury high-rise. At 26, she had perfected the art of invisibility, moving through the gleaming hallways like a ghost, unnoticed by the wealthy residents who lived in their glass towers above the clouds. Her calloused hands gripped the mop handle as she worked methodically, erasing every trace of the day's footprints left by Louboutin heels and Italian leather shoes. The residents of Meridian Tower existed in a different universe, one where champagne flowed like water and monthly rent exceeded most people's annual salaries. Clara knew their schedules by heart: the pharmaceutical heiress in 4A who hosted charity galas, the tech mogul in 7B who collected vintage cars, the oil executive in 12C who owned half of Texas. But Clara had her own secret world hidden beneath her janitor's uniform. Tucked inside her cleaning cart, wrapped in a threadbare towel between bottles of industrial cleaner, lay a sketchpad filled with whimsical drawings that would make any child's eyes light up with wonder. Dragons wearing tutus, cats solving mathematical equations, trees that grew books instead of leaves. Her imagination knew no boundaries when pencil met paper. Tonight felt different though. The building hummed with an electricity that made her skin prickle. Storm clouds had been gathering outside for hours, turning the New York skyline into a dramatic painting. Lightning flickered like camera flashes against the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating Clara's reflection as she worked. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and exhaustion carved delicate shadows under her brown eyes. She had been cleaning these floors for 3 years, saving every penny for the day she could finally quit and pursue her dream of illustrating children's books. The wealthy residents passed her like she was furniture, invisible, necessary, but unworthy of acknowledgement. Sometimes she wondered what it would feel like to be seen, truly seen, by someone who mattered. As Clara finished mopping the 42nd floor, thunder crashed overhead. The lights flickered ominously, and she quickened her pace. The last thing she needed was to be trapped in this building during a power outage. She wheeled her cart toward the service elevator, the one hidden behind an unmarked door that the residents never used. But tonight, fate had other plans. The service elevator was out of order, a handwritten sign taped crookedly to its brushed steel doors. Clara sighed, frustration bubbling in her chest. She would have to use the main elevator, the one with mirrors and marble accents that she always avoided because it felt too elegant for someone like her. The main elevator arrived with a soft ding, its doors sliding open to reveal an interior that looked more like a jewelry box than a mode of transportation. Crystal fixtures cast warm light across veined marble walls, and Clara caught her reflection in the polished mirrors. A small woman dwarfed by luxury she could never afford. She stepped inside, her mop bucket feeling heavier than usual, and pressed the button for the ground floor. The elevator began its descent, smooth as silk, carrying her down from the heights where dreams seemed impossible to the lobby where reality waited. Then, between the 38th and 37th floors, the world shifted. The elevator doors opened with their usual whisper, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. Booker Hale stepped inside, and suddenly the spacious elevator felt as intimate as a confession booth. She knew him, of course. Everyone in the building knew Booker Hale. At 32, he was the golden boy of Manhattan real estate, his face gracing the covers of Forbes and Bloomberg Businessweek with the regularity of a subscription service. His penthouse occupied the entire 50th floor, and rumors swirled about its price tag, somewhere north of $20 million. Tonight he wore a blue Tom Ford suit, his sandy hair perfectly tousled in that effortless way that required expensive stylists. His phone was pressed to his ear, his deep voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having his words treated like commandments. "No, Dante, absolutely not," he was saying, his jaw clenched with irritation. "If they can't meet our terms by Friday, we walk. I don't care if it's a billion-dollar deal, principles matter more than profit." Clara pressed herself against the elevator wall, trying to become even more invisible than usual. She had never been this close to him before, close enough to smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that reminded her of cedar and ambition. His presence filled the elevator like electricity before a storm, commanding and slightly dangerous. Booker glanced at her briefly, his piercing blue eyes sweeping over her uniform with the disinterested efficiency of someone cataloging furniture. Then his attention returned to his phone call, and Clara felt herself disappearing again, becoming part of the elevator's fixtures. "Listen, I've got another call coming in," Booker continued, his thumb hovering over his phone screen. "Let's circle back tomorrow," and the elevator lurched. Not a gentle stop, but a violent shudder that sent Clara's mop bucket sliding across the floor and knocked Booker against the wall. His phone clattered to the marble floor as the lights flickered like dying stars. Then, with a mechanical groan that sounded like the building's death rattle, everything went silent. Dead. Silent. The elevator hung suspended between floors, trapped in the building's steel skeleton like a bird in a cage. "What the hell?" Booker's voice cut through the darkness, his polished composure cracking like expensive porcelain. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. The walls seemed to press closer, the air growing thick and suffocating. Her childhood phobia of enclosed spaces clawed at her throat, threatening to drag her into full-blown panic. She pressed her palms against the cool marble wall, trying to ground herself, trying to breathe. The emergency lights flickered to life, casting everything in an eerie red glow that made the elegant elevator feel like a scene from a horror movie. Booker scrambled for his phone, frantically tapping the screen. "No signal," he muttered, running his hands through his perfect hair. "Of course there's no damn signal." Clara watched him pace the small space like a caged panther, his earlier confidence evaporating. The great Booker Hale, master of the universe, reduced to a frustrated man trapped in a box. "The emergency button," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "What?" Booker turned to her, as if suddenly remembering she existed. "The emergency button," she repeated, pointing to the red button nestled among the floor selections. "It should connect us to building security." Booker pressed it immediately, holding it down for several seconds. They waited, listening to the silence stretch between them like a taut wire. Nothing. No crackle of intercom, no reassuring voice promising rescue. "Perfect," Booker said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Absolutely perfect. I'm supposed to be in the Hamptons by midnight for the Morrison merger, and instead, I'm trapped in a metal coffin with—" He gestured vaguely at Clara, clearly struggling to categorize her. "With the janitor," Clara finished quietly, surprising herself with the edge in her voice. "Sorry to ruin your perfectly orchestrated evening, Mr. Hale." Booker's eyebrows shot up. "You know who I am." "Everyone knows who you are," Clara replied, then immediately regretted speaking at all. She had broken the first rule of service industry invisibility. Never engage the wealthy clientele. But instead of the dismissive sneer she expected, Booker's mouth quirked into something that might have been amusement. "And you are?" "Nobody important," Clara said, returning to her default position of professional self-effacement. "Well, nobody important," Booker said, settling against the elevator wall with surprising grace. "It looks like we're going to be here for a while. The storm outside is probably wreaking havoc on the building's electrical systems." As if summoned by his words, thunder exploded overhead, and the emergency lights flickered again. Clara's breathing became shallow, her chest tightening with each passing second. The wall seemed to creep closer, and she closed her eyes, trying to transport herself somewhere else. Anywhere else. "Hey," Booker's voice had lost its sardonic edge. Are you okay? Clara opened her eyes to find him studying her with genuine concern, his business mask slipping to reveal something unexpectedly human underneath. I don't like small spaces, she admitted, her voice trembling. Neither do I, Booker said softly. But not because they're small, because they're quiet. Something in his tone made Clara look at him more closely. Without his phone and his commanding presence, he looked younger, more vulnerable. The perfect image of Mr. Hale was cracking, revealing glimpses of the man behind the millionaire. What kind of name is Booker anyway? Clara asked, desperate to fill the silence that seemed to terrify him. Booker laughed. A real laugh this time, not the polished chuckle he probably used in board meetings. My grandmother's maiden name. She raised me after my parents died, said it would remind me to always be learning, always be growing. He paused, studying Clara's face in the red emergency light. What's your real name? Nobody important. Clara? She whispered. Clara? He repeated, and somehow her simple name sounded like poetry when he said it. That's a beautiful name. It means bright or clear, doesn't it? She nodded, surprised that he knew the etymology. Most people she met had never thought beyond the surface of anything, let alone the meaning of names. So Clara, Booker continued, settling more comfortably against the wall, tell me about those drawings I saw you hiding in your cart. Clara's eyes widened. You noticed those? I notice everything, Booker said, then added more gently. Especially things that make people smile the way you do when you think no one's watching. Heat crept up Clara's neck. She had been so careful, so professional, never letting her personal life bleed into her work. How had he seen through her invisible armor? They're just silly doodles, she mumbled, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her uniform. Nothing important. I highly doubt that, Booker said. You don't smile like that over nothing important. The storm raged outside, and somewhere in the building's electrical system, circuits sparked and died. But inside their temporary prison, something entirely different was being born, a connection neither of them had expected, forged in the space between floors where the rules of their separate worlds no longer applied. Lightning illuminated the narrow windows at the top of the elevator. And in that brief moment of clarity, Clara saw something in Booker's eyes that made her heart skip, like a scratched record. It wasn't pity or condescension or the calculating look of a man sizing up an opportunity. It was curiosity. Pure, genuine curiosity about who she was beneath her invisible uniform. And for the first time in 3 years of cleaning these halls, Clara Martinez felt seen. The elevator creaked around them, metal settling against metal, and Clara realized that sometimes the most unexpected prisons could become the most liberating places on earth. She was about to discover just how true that could be. 3 days had passed since the elevator incident, and Clara Martinez had convinced herself it was nothing more than a bizarre fever dream. Wealthy men like Booker Hale didn't remember conversations with janitors, especially conversations that happened during moments of vulnerability. She had returned to her nocturnal routine of invisible existence, mopping floors and emptying trash bins, while the city's elite slept soundly in their marble towers. But something strange had shifted in the Meridian Tower. It started subtly. Clara noticed Booker's coffee cup abandoned on the lobby's reception desk Tuesday morning, still warm when she found it during her dawn cleaning round. Wednesday she discovered his designer briefcase left carelessly by the mailboxes, as if its owner had been distracted by something more important than his million-dollar business deals. Thursday night brought the first real confirmation that their elevator encounter had been more than a forgotten blip in his privileged universe. Clara was polishing the brass fixtures in the lobby when she heard the distinctive ping of the main elevator. It was 11:47 p.m., far too late for any resident to be arriving home from their glamorous social obligations. She glanced up from her work, expecting to see the building's night security guard making his rounds. Instead, Booker Hale stepped into the lobby, wearing dark jeans and a simple navy sweater, looking more like a graduate student than a real estate mogul. His hair was disheveled, as if he'd been running his fingers through it, and his usual commanding presence seemed muted. Their eyes met across the marble expanse, and Clara felt electricity shoot through her nervous system like lightning finding a conductor. She immediately looked away, focusing intently on a perfectly clean brass handle that definitely didn't need additional polishing. "Working late again?" Booker's voice carried across the lobby, warm and casual in a way that made Clara's pulse quicken. "Someone has to keep your palace spotless," Clara replied without thinking, then immediately cursed herself for being so forward. What was wrong with her? 3 days ago, she wouldn't have dared speak to him so casually. But Booker laughed, that same genuine sound that had surprised her in the elevator. "Palace, huh? I prefer to think of it as an overpriced prison with better room service." Clara's hands stilled on the brass fixture. There was something in his voice, a weariness that seemed at odds with his successful life. She risked another glance in his direction, and found him studying the lobby as if seeing it for the first time. "Funny thing about prisons," Clara said quietly. "Sometimes you don't realize you're in one until someone shows you the bars." Booker's head snapped toward her, his blue eyes sharp with surprise. "That's unexpectedly profound for midnight philosophy." "Occupational hazard," Clara said, returning to her polishing with renewed intensity. "You see a lot when you're invisible. You're not invisible." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Clara's heart performed a gymnastics routine against her ribs, but she forced herself to keep working, to maintain the safe distance that employment contracts and social hierarchies demanded. "Mr. Hale." "Booker," he corrected, taking a step closer. "And you're Clara. We've been properly introduced by circumstance, remember?" The memory of their trapped conversation flooded back, his admission about fearing silence, her confession about tight spaces, the way they had laughed together in that red-lit metal box suspended between worlds. "I remember," Clara said softly. Booker moved closer, close enough that she could smell that cedar and ambition cologne again, close enough to see the genuine curiosity burning in his eyes. "I've been thinking about what you said in the elevator, about some prisons feeling like freedom." Clara's hands trembled slightly as she set down her polishing cloth. "You remember that?" "I remember everything," Booker said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Especially the part where you said your gum-scrubbing shift was ruined too. That was the moment I realized you weren't just another employee. You were a person with her own plans, her own frustrations, her own life that I had somehow disrupted." The lobby felt impossibly vast and intimately small at the same time. Clara had never been the center of such focused attention from someone like him, and it was both thrilling and terrifying. "I should get back to work," Clara said, though her feet remained planted on the marble floor, as if rooted there by some invisible force. "Wait," Booker said, and something in his tone made her pause. "I saw them, you know, the drawings." Clara's blood turned to ice water. "What drawings?" "In your cart. The sketch pad you keep hidden between the cleaning supplies." Booker's expression softened. "They're extraordinary, Clara, absolutely extraordinary." Panic flooded Clara's system. Her secret world had been discovered, her private sanctuary violated by prying eyes. "You had no right to look through my things," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of embarrassment and fury. "You're absolutely right," Booker said immediately, raising his hands in surrender. "I'm sorry. I was waiting for the elevator, and your cart was right there, and I saw a corner of paper sticking out and curiosity got the better of me. I know that's not an excuse." Clara wanted to run, to disappear into the service corridors where people like Booker Hale never ventured, but something in his expression stopped her. Genuine remorse mixed with something that looked suspiciously like admiration. "They're just doodles," Clara said weakly. "Bullshit." The profanity coming from his perfectly cultured mouth shocked them both. Booker looked as surprised as Clara felt, as if the word had escaped without his permission. "I mean," he said, collecting himself, "those aren't doodles. Those are windows into worlds I never knew existed. The dragon wearing a tutu solving algebraic equations, the tree growing books instead of leaves. Clara, those drawings have more imagination and heart than anything I've seen in a gallery worth millions." Clara stared at him, searching his face for signs of mockery or condescension. Instead, she found something that looked almost like hunger. Not for her, but for the creative spark that lived inside her drawings. "You don't understand," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "People like me don't get to be artists. We get to clean up after people who can afford to be artists." "People like you." Booker's voice carried a dangerous edge. "What exactly does that mean?" Clara gestured helplessly at her uniform, at the mop bucket, at the vast gulf of marble and money that separated their worlds. "This. All of this. I'm a janitor, Mr. Hale. I scrub your toilets and mop your floors and empty your garbage. I don't get to have dreams that matter." Something shifted in Booker's expression. He stepped closer, close enough that Clara had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice carrying the same authority he used in business deals, but warmer somehow, more personal. "You're going to show me your art. All of it. And I'm going to buy you dinner afterward." Clara blinked, certain she had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "A challenge," Booker said, his mouth curving into a smile that transformed his entire face. "Show me your art, and I'll buy you dinner. If it's terrible, which I highly doubt, dinner's still on me. Consider it payment for 3 days of curiosity that's been driving me slowly insane." "You're insane," Clara breathed. "Probably," Booker agreed cheerfully. "But I'm also serious. What do you say, Clara Martinez?" The fact that he knew her last name sent another shockwave through her system. She had never told him her full name, which meant he had gone to the trouble of finding out. The thought should have been creepy, but instead it felt like being acknowledged as a complete person, rather than a uniform and a mop bucket. "I can't," Clara said, but even as the words left her mouth, she could feel her resolve weakening. "It's against company policy for employees to fraternize with residents." "Then we won't fraternize," Booker said with mock seriousness. "We'll discuss art over food, completely professional. I'm a real estate developer looking to commission artwork for my properties, and you're a talented artist considering a business proposal." Clara's laugh escaped before she could stop it. "You're ridiculous." "I'm determined," Booker corrected. "There's a difference. Besides, when was the last time you showed your work to someone who wasn't trying to be polite?" The question hit Clara. The truth was, she had never shown her work to anyone. Not really. Her sketches lived in secret, viewed only by her own eyes in the safety of her studio apartment, treasured, but never shared. "I don't have them with me," Clara said, grasping for any excuse to avoid this terrifying leap into visibility. "Tomorrow night," Booker said immediately. "Same time, same lobby. Bring whatever you're willing to share." Clara's practical mind screamed warnings about risks and consequences, and the vast chasm between their social positions. But beneath the fear, something else stirred, a hunger she had been ignoring for too long, a desperate desire to be seen as more than the sum of her invisible parts. "And if my art really is terrible?" Clara asked. Booker's smile turned gentle, and for a moment, Clara caught a glimpse of the boy he must have been before money and power shaped him into the commanding figure the world knew. "Then we'll have dinner anyway," he said. "And I'll tell you about the time I thought I was going to be a professional baseball player, before I realized I couldn't hit a curveball to save my life." Thunder crashed overhead again, and the building's lights flickered back to life with a hum. The elevator groaned once and began moving again, carrying them down toward the lobby floor where their separate worlds waited to reclaim them. But as the doors slid open with their usual whisper, Clara realized that something fundamental had changed. The invisible barrier between them had developed cracks, and through those cracks, possibility was leaking in like sunlight through storm clouds. "Tomorrow night," Booker said as he stepped out of the elevator, his business mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. "Don't chicken out on me, Clara Martinez." The elevator doors closed, leaving Clara alone with her thundering heart and the echo of her name spoken like a promise. She pressed the button for the ground floor, but her mind was already racing ahead to tomorrow night, to the terrifying prospect of sharing her secret world with someone who lived in an entirely different universe. As the elevator descended, Clara caught her reflection in the polished mirrors and saw something she hadn't seen in years. Anticipation glowing in her dark eyes like candlelight in a window. Maybe, just maybe, some prisons were worth breaking out of. Clara's hands trembled as she clutched the crumpled manila folder against her chest, standing in the Meridian Tower lobby like a defendant awaiting verdict. Inside the folder lay 15 of her most precious drawings, sketches she had guarded, illustrations that contained pieces of her soul rendered in graphite and colored pencil. The grandfather clock chimed 11:30, and with each resonant note, Clara's courage leaked away like air from a punctured balloon. What had possessed her to agree to this madness? Booker Hale could buy and sell her dreams without blinking. And here she was, about to hand him ammunition to destroy the last vestige of hope she carried in her heart. She was 3 steps from the exit when the elevator doors opened with their familiar whisper. "Running away already?" Booker's voice carried across the marble expanse, warm with amusement, and something that might have been relief. Clara turned slowly, expecting to see him in another perfectly tailored suit, armed with the casual cruelty that wealth often bred. Instead, she found herself staring at a man who looked almost nervous. He wore dark jeans and a gray sweater that made his blue eyes look like storm-touched ocean. His hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his fingers through it. "I was considering it," Clara admitted, honesty spilling out before she could stop it. "Don't," Booker said simply, walking toward her with measured steps, as if approaching a skittish animal. "Please, I've been thinking about this moment for 3 days." "You have?" The surprise in her voice made Booker pause mid-stride. "Clara, I haven't been able to concentrate on anything since Tuesday night. My assistant thinks I'm having a breakdown because I've missed 2 conference calls and forgot about a board meeting. All because I keep wondering what stories your drawings tell." Clara's grip tightened on the folder. "They're not stories, they're just escape routes." "Show me," Booker said, and the raw hunger in his voice made Clara's breath catch. "Show me where you escaped to." The lobby suddenly felt too public, too exposed, but Booker seemed to sense her discomfort because he gestured toward the building's small cafe area. A collection of plush chairs and coffee tables that residents used for informal meetings. "More private," he explained, leading her to a corner where shadows provided sanctuary from the lobby's brightness. Clara sank into a velvet armchair, the folder burning against her chest like a guilty secret. Booker settled across from her, leaning forward with an intensity that made her feel like the most important person in his universe. "Before I show you anything," Clara said, her voice barely steady, "I need you to understand something. These drawings, they're not professional, they're not gallery-worthy. They're just places I go when the world feels too heavy." Booker's expression softened. "Some of the most beautiful art comes from exactly those places." With trembling fingers, Clara opened the folder and pulled out the first drawing. A whimsical illustration of a library where books grew on trees and children climbed ladders to pick stories like fruit. She placed it on the coffee table between them and watched Booker's face carefully, bracing for polite dismissal or patronizing praise. Instead, she witnessed something extraordinary. Booker's eyes widened, then crinkled at the corners as a slow smile spread across his face like sunrise over mountains. He reached for the drawing with his fingers, studying every detail as if it contained the secrets of the universe. "This is incredible," he breathed, tracing the delicate lines of children reaching for story fruit. The detail, the imagination. Clara, this is pure magic. Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. It's silly. It's brilliant, Booker interrupted firmly. Show me more, please. Emboldened by his genuine enthusiasm, Clara began laying out drawing after drawing. A coffee shop where steam from lattes formed cloud creatures that granted wishes. A subway train carrying passengers to their childhood dreams instead of mundane destinations. A garden where flowers bloomed in musical notes and bees collected melodies instead of pollen. With each illustration, Booker's excitement grew. He asked questions that revealed he wasn't just looking, he was seeing. He understood the deeper meanings, the hope embedded in every whimsical detail. This one, Booker said, picking up a drawing of a janitor's closet that opened into a magical kingdom, this one breaks my heart in the most beautiful way. Clara's throat tightened. That drawing was her most personal, a visual representation of her daily reality and her desperate dreams existing side by side. It's autobiographical, she whispered. I know, Booker said gently, and it's stunning. They sat in silence for a moment. Clara's artwork spread between them, like a bridge spanning two different worlds. Then Booker carefully gathered the drawings and handed them back to her, with the care usually reserved for priceless artifacts. Dinner, he said, standing and extending his hand. I believe I owe you dinner. Clara expected him to lead her to one of the city's exclusive restaurants, the kind of place where reservations required connections and meals cost a fortune. Instead, Booker guided her to his sleek black car and drove through the streets to a neighborhood that looked like it had been forgotten by Manhattan's relentless gentrification. Murphy's Diner sat wedged between a laundromat and a used bookstore, its neon sign flickering with the persistence of an old friend. The red vinyl booths had seen better decades, and the air smelled like coffee that had been brewing since the Carter administration. This is, Clara began, then stopped, unsure how to finish. Home, Booker said simply, opening the diner's door for her. Or the closest thing I had to one for a long time. The night waitress, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and knowing eyes, looked up from her crossword puzzle and grinned. Well, I'll be damned, Booker hailed, gracing us with his fancy presence. Haven't seen you since Christmas. Hey, Dolores, Booker said, relaxing as he slid into their booth. The usual booth still available? For you? Always, honey. Dolores turned her attention to Clara, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. And who might this lovely young lady be? This is Clara, Booker said, and Clara noticed he didn't add any qualifier, not my cleaning lady or someone from work. Just Clara, as if her name alone was sufficient introduction. Clara, Dolores repeated, testing the name like a wine sommelier. Pretty name for a pretty girl. What can I get you folks? Coffee's fresh, and Sal just made a new batch of his famous apple pie. They ordered burgers and fries and milkshakes that arrived in glasses large enough to swim in. And as they ate, the walls between their worlds began to crumble like ancient fortifications. So how does a millionaire real estate mogul end up with a favorite booth at Murphy's Diner? Clara asked, stealing one of his French fries with surprising boldness. Booker's expression grew distant. Foster care, he said quietly. After my parents died in a car accident when I was 12, I bounced between homes for 6 years. Murphy's was 2 blocks from my last placement, with Mrs. Jocelyn, who actually gave a damn. I used to come here when the house got too loud or too quiet, whichever was worse that day. Clara's heart clenched. Beneath all that wealth and confidence lived a boy who had learned to find comfort in vinyl booths and bottomless coffee cups. I'm sorry, she said softly. Don't be, Booker replied, meeting her eyes. It taught me that real value isn't measured in stock portfolios or square footage. Sometimes it's measured in fries shared with someone who sees you for who you really are. The weight of his words settled between them. Clara found herself leaning forward, drawn by the vulnerability. What about you? Booker asked. What's the story behind the girl who draws magic into the margins of reality? Clara's fingers traced the rim of her milkshake glass, gathering courage from its coolness. Art school, she said finally. I had a full scholarship to Parsons. 4 years to study illustration, to learn how to turn imagination into career. What happened? Life, Clara said with a bitter laugh. Mum got sick, cancer. The treatments, the hospital bills, the choice between my dreams and her survival. She shrugged, but the gesture carried the weight of sacrifice. I left school, took the first job I could find that offered health insurance. Been cleaning floors and drawing in secret ever since. Booker was quiet for a long moment, his milkshake forgotten as he studied her face. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an emotion Clara couldn't quite identify. She's lucky to have you, he said. She was, Clara corrected softly. She died 8 months ago. The words hung in the air between them, like a prayer for the departed. Booker reached across the table and covered Clara's hand with his own, the gesture so natural and comforting that Clara felt tears threaten behind her eyes. I'm sorry, he said, and the sincerity in his voice made her believe he truly meant it. They sat like that for a moment, his warm hand anchoring her to the present moment, while her memories tried to drag her back to hospital rooms and final goodbyes. Is that why you keep drawing? Booker asked gently. To honor her memory. Clara considered the question, surprised by its insight. I think I keep drawing because it's the only part of me that still feels alive. Everything else is just surviving. Booker's thumb traced gentle circles across her knuckles. Then we need to figure out how to turn surviving back into living. The simple declaration hit Clara like lightning, illuminating possibilities she had been too afraid to imagine. Here was a man who lived in a world where anything was possible, offering to help her find her way back to dreams she had buried beneath responsibility and grief. Why? Clara whispered. Why do you care what happens to me? Booker was quiet for so long that Clara began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, with an emotion that made her heart skip. Because 3 nights ago, trapped in that elevator with you, I felt more real than I have in years. You looked at me like I was just a person instead of a portfolio, and for the first time since I made my first million, I remembered what it felt like to be human. He paused, his eyes intense on hers. Your art reminds me that magic still exists in the world. And I think maybe I remind you that dreams don't have expiration dates. Outside Murphy's Diner, New York City hummed with its endless symphony of ambition and heartbreak. But inside their vinyl booth, surrounded by the aroma of coffee and possibility, Clara Martinez felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope flickering to life like a match struck in darkness. The walls between their worlds were beginning to fall, and Clara was no longer sure she wanted to rebuild them. 3 weeks had transformed Clara's world from black and white into vivid technicolor. What had begun as an unlikely dinner invitation had blossomed into something she had never dared to dream. Stolen moments that felt like scenes from movies she couldn't afford to watch. Booker had become a master of orchestrated coincidences. He would appear in the lobby during her breaks, armed with coffee and conversation that made her forget she was supposed to be invisible. They discovered secret corners of the building where they could talk without scrutiny, the rooftop garden where city lights sparkled like earthbound constellations, the empty conference room on the 20th floor, where Booker would sketch terrible stick figures while Clara drew masterpieces on napkins. Their midnight walks through Central Park had become Clara's favorite addiction. Booker would text her when his insomnia struck, and she would meet him by the fountain, where moonlight turned water into liquid silver. He told her about board meetings that felt like gladiator matches, about the crushing weight of expectations that came with inherited wealth. She shared stories about the building's residents, their quirks and kindnesses, their loneliness that no amount of money seemed to cure. It was during one of these walks that Clara had sketched him for the first time. She had been doodling absent-mindedly while he talked about a difficult acquisition, her pencil moving across the paper like it had a mind of its own. When she looked down, she'd captured something remarkable. Not the polished businessman the world knew, but the vulnerable man beneath the armor, his eyes soft with kindness she was learning to recognize. "Is that how you see me?" Booker had asked, studying the drawing with wonder. "It's how you really are," Clara had replied, "when you forget to be perfect." Now, 21 drawings of Booker filled her sketchpad, each one revealing another layer of the man who had somehow become the most important person in her small world. She drew him laughing at her terrible jokes, contemplating the city skyline, sleeping peacefully on the rooftop during their late-night conversations. In every sketch she emphasized the gentleness that he seemed determined to hide from everyone else. Clara was adding finishing touches to her latest drawing, Booker reading to children at the library where she had started volunteering, when her phone exploded with notifications. Text after text flooded her screen, each one more than the last. Her friend Maria from the night cleaning crew. "Clara, have you seen the news? You need to call me right now." Her neighbor Mrs. Patterson. "Honey, there are reporters outside your building. Don't come home." A number she didn't recognize. "This is Channel 7 News. We'd like to speak with you about your relationship with Booker Hale." Clara's blood turned to Arctic water. With shaking fingers, she opened her web browser and searched for Booker's name, though every instinct screamed at her to stop, to pretend whatever was happening wasn't happening. She was shocked by the headlines. "Millionaire's maid, real estate mogul's secret romance with building janitor, gold digger alert. How a clever cleaning lady seduced Manhattan's most eligible bachelor. From mop to millions. The Cinderella story that's really a con game." The articles were brutal masterpieces of character assassination. Anonymous sources painted Clara as a calculating predator who had deliberately manipulated their elevator encounter. Photos showed her entering and leaving the building, taken with telephoto lenses that made her look furtive and guilty. Her work uniform was described as a costume, designed to attract Booker's sympathy. The worst part was the quotes attributed to close friends of Booker, people claiming he was being manipulated by a woman who saw dollar signs instead of genuine affection. They described Clara as desperate, opportunistic, a master manipulator who preyed on wealthy men's desire to play savior. "She's clearly studied his patterns and preferences," one anonymous source claimed. "This isn't romance. It's a business plan." Clara's hands shook so violently she could barely hold her phone. Her private world, their secret moments, their growing connection, all of it had been twisted into something ugly and mercenary. She felt violated, exposed, like someone had ripped away her skin and put her raw nerves on display for the world's entertainment. Her phone rang, Booker's name flashing on the screen like a lifeline. Clara stared at it for 3 rings before answering, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did you see?" "I saw." Booker's voice was tight with controlled fury. "Clara, listen to me. This is Luther Wellington's work, my biggest competitor. He's been trying to sabotage me for months. This isn't about you, it's about hurting me." "But the things they're saying are lies," Booker said fiercely. "Vicious lies designed to destroy something beautiful before it has a chance to grow." Clara closed her eyes, but she could still see the headlines burning behind her eyelids. "Booker, I can't handle this. I'm not built for this kind of attention." "You don't have to handle it alone," Booker said, his voice gentle despite the steel underneath. "We'll weather this together. I'm calling my lawyers, my PR team." "No," Clara interrupted, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. "I need to think. I need space." The silence that followed felt like the moment before an avalanche. "Clara, I have to go," she whispered, and hung up before he could respond. Within an hour, the media circus had found her apartment building. News vans lined the street like hungry vultures, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical prayers. Reporters with perfect hair and predatory smiles lurked by the entrance, shoving microphones at anyone who emerged. Clara watched from her 4th-floor window as her quiet life became public entertainment. A reporter was interviewing Mrs. Patterson. who was clearly enjoying her 15 minutes of fame as she speculated about Clara's secret wealth and expensive new clothes that existed only in the woman's imagination. The betrayal cut deeper than the media attention. These were her neighbors, people she had helped with groceries and pet sitting, now eager to sell fictional stories about her character for 30 seconds of television time. But the real devastation came the next morning. Clara had taken the day off work, too afraid to leave her apartment and face the feeding frenzy outside. She was nursing her third cup of coffee and trying to ignore the persistent knocking at her door when her phone buzzed with a news alert. Hale Enterprises stock drops 3% amid scandal. Investors concerned about CEO's judgment. The article detailed how Booker's relationship with an unnamed service employee was causing concerns among major investors. Board members were questioning his decision-making, suggesting that his personal life was becoming a liability to the company's reputation. Clara's heart shattered like glass hitting concrete. She wasn't just being destroyed by this scandal, she was destroying Booker too. His empire, built on reputation and trust, was crumbling because of her. Her phone rang again. Booker's name on the screen felt like an accusation. "Clara, where are you?" His voice was strained, exhausted. "I've been trying to reach you all morning." "I saw the news," Clara said, her voice hollow. "About your stock price." "Fuck the stock price," Booker said with vehemence that surprised her. "Clara, I need to see you. We need to talk about this together." "There's nothing to talk about," Clara said, each word feeling like she was swallowing broken glass. "This proves everything they're saying is true. I'm ruining your life." "You're the best thing that's happened to my life," Booker said desperately. "Clara, please, don't let them win. Don't let Luther destroy what we've built." But Clara had already made her decision. The little girl who had learned to be invisible was taking control of the narrative the only way she knew how, by disappearing entirely. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and hung up. The resignation letter was the hardest thing Clara had ever written. She kept it simple, professional, free of the emotional devastation that was eating her alive from the inside. "Dear Mr. Patterson, please accept this letter as my formal 2 weeks' notice. Due to personal circumstances, I will be unable to continue my employment at Meridian Tower. Thank you for the opportunity. Sincerely, Clara Martinez." But she couldn't leave without saying goodbye properly. Not to Booker. That wound was too fresh, too raw. But to the place where their impossible love story had begun. Clara used her master key to access the main elevator one last time. As the doors closed around her, she pulled out her sketchpad and drew with desperate intensity. The elevator, rendered in careful detail. The emergency buttons that had failed them that first night. The mirrors that had reflected their growing connection. At the bottom of the page she wrote in her careful artist's script, "Some prisons feel like freedom." She left the drawing on the floor of the elevator, weighted down with her employee badge and access card. Then she walked out of Meridian Tower and into the flashing lights of waiting photographers, her head held high despite the tears streaming down her face. "Miss Martinez! Miss Martinez!" The reporters swarmed like locusts, their questions overlapping into incomprehensible noise. "How long have you been planning this relationship? What's your endgame? How much money are you hoping to get?" Clara pushed through the crowd without speaking, her silence somehow more damning than any denial could have been. Behind her, camera flashes turned the night into a nightmare, capturing her retreat for tomorrow's headlines. 3 blocks away, safely hidden in the shadows of a coffee shop doorway, Clara finally allowed herself to fall apart. She had protected Booker the only way she knew how, by removing herself from his life, before she could cause more damage. But as she cried for the love story that had ended before it truly began, Clara didn't know that in his penthouse 50 floors above the city, Booker Hale was staring at her final drawing with tears in his eyes, realizing that in trying to protect her from his world, he had lost the only person who had ever made that world feel worth inhabiting. The first chapter of their love story was over, destroyed by forces neither of them had seen coming. But love stories, like elevators, sometimes have to break down completely before they can be rebuilt stronger than before. 6 weeks of radio silence had nearly driven Booker Hale to the edge of madness. 42 days of hiring private investigators who came back empty-handed. 42 nights of standing in that elevator, staring at the spot where Clara's final drawing had been, memorizing every line of her goodbye message until the words were burned into his retinas. The building's new night janitor, a 60-year-old man named Roberto who worked efficiently but without magic, only served to remind Booker of the creative spark that had vanished from his life. His business had recovered from the scandal with typical Wall Street amnesia. Stock prices rebounded, investors returned their calls, and Marcus Wellington's smear campaign had backfired spectacularly when Booker's legal team exposed the manufactured evidence. But professional vindication felt hollow when the woman who had inspired it was nowhere to be found. Booker had become obsessed with finding Clara, driven by a desperation that his rational mind couldn't explain. He had hired the best investigators money could buy, but Clara Martinez had vanished as completely as if she had never existed. No forwarding address, no social media presence, no digital footprint leading to her new life. It was his assistant Jennifer who finally provided the breakthrough, though she delivered it with the reluctance of someone bearing bad news. "Sir," Jennifer said, standing in his office doorway with tablet in hand and worry in her eyes, "I found something. About Clara Martinez." Booker's head snapped up from the quarterly reports he had been pretending to read. "Where is she?" "The Brooklyn Community Arts Center," Jennifer said carefully. "She's been volunteering there, teaching children's digital illustration classes." "But sir," she hesitated, clearly debating whether to continue. "What?" Booker demanded, already reaching for his car keys. "There's a small art fair happening there this weekend, local artists selling their work. According to the center's newsletter, it's Clara's first time displaying her illustrations publicly." The information surprised Booker. Clara was finally sharing her art with the world. The same art she had been too afraid to show anyone except him. The same magical illustrations that had haunted his dreams for 6 weeks. And he had no idea if she would want to see him or if his presence would destroy this fragile step toward her dreams. But love, Booker had learned, required courage that went beyond boardroom negotiations and hostile takeovers. Saturday morning found Booker standing outside the Brooklyn Community Arts Center, a converted warehouse in a neighborhood where gentrification hadn't yet erased the authentic character of working-class dreams. The building buzzed with creative energy, musicians tuning instruments, painters arranging canvases, sculptors positioning their latest masterpieces under the natural light streaming through industrial windows. Booker felt wildly out of place in his designer jeans and Italian leather jacket, like a wolf trying to blend into a flock of sheep, but he pressed forward, driven by a need to see Clara that had become as essential as breathing. He found her in the far corner of the warehouse, hunched over a small folding table that displayed her illustrations like precious artifacts. She wore a simple sundress the color of summer sky, her hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked beautiful and terrified in equal measure, her eyes darting nervously between her artwork and the slowly growing crowd of potential buyers. Booker's breath caught in his throat. Seeing her again after 6 weeks felt like coming back to life after a long, dreamless sleep. But what stopped him cold was the way she had arranged her display. Every drawing told a story of hope triumphing over despair, of magic existing in the mundane world, of love transcending impossible odds. At the center of her collection hung a new piece that made Booker's heart stop completely. It was the elevator, their elevator, but reimagined as a gateway between worlds. On one side, a woman in a janitor's uniform reached toward the doors. On the other side, the same woman wore flowing artist's robes, her hands covered in paint, surrounded by floating illustrations that danced through the air like butterflies. The title card read, Metamorphosis. Finding Freedom in Unexpected Places. Booker approached her table slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. Clara was helping a young mother choose between two fairy tale illustrations when she looked up and saw him. The color drained from her face like water from a broken dam, and for a terrifying moment, Booker thought she might run. "Hello, Clara," he said softly, his voice carrying 6 weeks of longing and regret. "Booker," she whispered, his name escaping her lips like a prayer or a curse, he couldn't tell which. The young mother glanced between them, sensing the electric tension crackling in the air, and quietly moved on to another vendor's table. Suddenly, Booker and Clara were alone in their corner of the warehouse, surrounded by her dreams made manifest but separated by an invisible chasm of hurt and misunderstanding. "You found me," Clara said, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the art fair. "I never stopped looking," Booker replied, his eyes drinking in every detail of her face as if committing her to memory. "Clara, please don't," Clara interrupted, her hands fluttering nervously over her drawings like a mother protecting her children. "Don't say whatever you came here to say. I'm finally starting to heal, and I can't go through that again." The pain in her voice hit Booker. He had spent 6 weeks crafting the perfect apology, rehearsing explanations and justifications that would make her understand why he had failed her when she needed him most. But looking at her now, seeing the way she had transformed her heartbreak into art, the way she had found the courage to share her gift with the world despite everything, he realized that explanations weren't what she needed. She needed action, she needed proof that their love story was worth fighting for. Without saying another word, Booker began examining her like museum curator. He studied each piece carefully, noting the price tags that were heartbreakingly modest. $15 for illustrations that contained more soul than paintings worth millions. "I'll take this one," Booker said, picking up a drawing of children riding carousel horses that flew off their poles into star-filled skies. Clara blinked in confusion. "You want to buy one drawing?" "This one," Booker continued, selecting a piece showing a library where books grew wings and flew to readers who needed them most. "And this one." He picked up another. A coffee shop where steam from lattes formed love letters in the air. "Booker, what are you doing?" Clara asked, but he was already moving through her collection like a man possessed. "This one," he said, claiming a drawing of a janitor's closet that opened into a galaxy. "And this one. A playground where swings carried children into cloud kingdoms. And this one. The elevator metamorphosis that had nearly brought him to his knees." A small crowd began to gather, drawn by the spectacle of a well-dressed man systematically purchasing an unknown artist's entire collection. Whispers rippled through the gathering audience as people pulled out phones to capture the unusual scene. "Sir, you can't buy everything," Clara protested, but Booker was relentless, selecting drawing after drawing until nearly her entire display was claimed. "This one," he said, picking up her latest piece. The drawing of him reading to children, his face soft with the kindness she insisted on seeing in him. "Definitely this one." "Booker, stop," Clara said, her voice breaking. "People are staring." "Let them stare," Booker said, turning to face her with an intensity that made her step backward. "Clara, for 6 weeks I've been a coward. I let my fear of scandal and my investors' opinions matter more than protecting the woman I love. I failed you when you needed me most, and I have to live with that for the rest of my life." The crowd around them had grown larger, phones recording every word, but Booker continued as if they were alone in the universe. "But if anyone thinks you're a gold digger," Booker's voice rose, carrying across the warehouse with the authority that had built his empire, "then I'm the fool praying you keep digging at my heart until you reach something worth keeping." Gasps rippled through the audience. Someone dropped their coffee cup, the ceramic shattering against the concrete floor. But Clara only heard the thundering of her own heartbeat as Booker pulled out his wallet and began counting out bills, not just for her modestly priced artwork, but far more than the pieces were worth, treating her illustrations like the priceless treasures he believed them to be. Every drawing, he announced to the growing crowd, his voice carrying the conviction of a man making a public declaration of war. "I'm buying every single piece because this woman is the most talented artist I've ever encountered, and anyone who suggests otherwise can take it up with me personally." Tears streamed down Clara's face as she watched him transform her humble art fair display into a statement of faith in her talent. But more than that, he was using his wealth and influence, the very things that had nearly destroyed them, as weapons in defense of her dreams. "Booker," she whispered, "you don't have to." "Yes, I do," he said fiercely, turning back to her with eyes blazing. "I should have done this 6 weeks ago. I should have stood in front of every camera, every reporter, every investor, and told them that you are the most authentic person I've ever met. That you see magic where others see mundane, that you create beauty from nothing, that you make me want to be worthy of the kindness you draw in my face." The warehouse had gone completely silent, except for the soft whir of phone cameras capturing every word. Clara felt exposed and protected simultaneously, vulnerable and powerful under the weight of Booker's public declaration. "I forgive you," Clara said quietly, the words escaping before she could stop them. Relief flooded Booker's features like sunrise after the longest night. "Does that mean—" "It means I forgive you," Clara said, accepting the stack of bills he pressed into her hands. "It doesn't mean I'm ready to step back into that spotlight. Then we'll build our own light," Booker said, his voice soft with promise. "Slowly, carefully, at whatever pace feels right to you." As they walked out of the art fair together, Clara's sold-out display behind them, and the future uncertain ahead, she realized that some love stories required more than one beginning. Sometimes they needed to shatter completely before they could be rebuilt into something unbreakable. But even as hope began to bloom in her chest again, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that their trials were far from over. Love this intense, this transformative, rarely survived without facing its ultimate test. She just had no idea how soon that test would come. The months following their reconciliation unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony, each movement building towards something neither Clara nor Booker dared to name aloud. Their relationship had evolved into something deeper than romance. It was partnership, built on the foundation of their shared brokenness and mutual healing. Clara's teaching position at the Brooklyn Community Arts Center had blossomed into something extraordinary. With Booker's financial backing, carefully structured as an anonymous grant to avoid any hint of impropriety, she had created Digital Dreams, a program where underprivileged children learned to blend traditional art with cutting-edge technology. Her classroom became a sanctuary where imagination met innovation, where kids who had never owned a computer learned to create digital masterpieces that rivaled anything produced in elite art schools. "Miss Clara, look what I made." 8-year-old Destiny bounded up to her tablet station, practically vibrating with excitement. The girl had started the program barely able to hold a pencil correctly, but now her screen displayed a stunning digital painting of her grandmother as a superhero, complete with flowing cape and eyes that sparkled with starlight. "Destiny, this is incredible," Clara breathed, genuinely amazed by her student's progress. "You've captured not just how your grandmother looks but how she makes you feel. That's real artistry." The little girl beamed with pride before racing back to add more details to her masterpiece. Clara watched her go, her heart swelling with a satisfaction she had never experienced during her years of invisible cleaning. This was purpose. This was impact. This was the life she had dreamed of but never believed she deserved. Her phone buzzed with a text from Booker. "Dinner tonight. I have something to show you." Clara smiled, typing back, "Only if you promise it's not another business proposal disguised as romance." "Would I do that?" came his immediate reply, followed by, "Don't answer that." Their relationship had found a rhythm that surprised them both. Booker had learned to exist in Clara's world, volunteering at the community center, helping with art supply drives, even learning to operate the industrial coffee machine that kept the teachers caffeinated during long days. Clara, in turn, had begun to navigate his world with increasing confidence, attending charity events where she could advocate for arts education, and meeting his business associates who were slowly learning to see her as more than Booker's unusual girlfriend. But underneath their happiness, shadows were gathering. Clara had noticed the signs over the past month, though Booker had become masterful at hiding them. The way he pressed his hand to his chest during moments of stress, the prescription bottles he tried to conceal in his bathroom cabinet, the doctor's appointments that appeared on his calendar with vague labels like routine consultation. She had chosen not to confront him directly, respecting the privacy he seemed desperate to maintain. But love, Clara was learning, sometimes meant seeing what people tried to hide, especially when what they were hiding could destroy them. The first real crisis came on a Tuesday evening that had started like any other. Clara was working late at the community center, finalizing preparations for the children's first digital art exhibition, when her phone rang with an unknown number. The voice on the other end was professional, clinical, terrifyingly calm. "Miss Martinez, this is Dr. Lydia Stark from Mount Sinai Hospital. You're listed as Mr. Hale's emergency contact. He's been admitted to our cardiac unit." The world tilted sideways. Clara's tablet slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering to the floor as her knees gave out. She found herself sitting hard on the classroom floor, surrounded by her students' artwork, while a doctor's voice explained medical terms that sounded like a foreign language. "Heart attack" were the only words that penetrated the ringing in Clara's ears. "Stable condition, genetic defect, surgery required." Clara ran through the hospital corridors like a woman possessed, her artist's smock still covered in paint from the day's lessons, her hair wild from the subway ride across the city. She burst into the cardiac wing, demanding to see Booker Hale, and a nurse with kind eyes and steady hands guided her to room 412. Nothing could have prepared Clara for the sight that greeted her. Booker lay connected to a symphony of machines, their beeping creating a mechanical lullaby that marked each precious heartbeat. His face was pale against the white pillows, his usually commanding presence reduced to vulnerability that made Clara's chest ache with protective fury. Tubes and wires turned the man who controlled millions into someone frighteningly mortal. "You magnificent stubborn fool," Clara whispered, collapsing into the chair beside his bed. "How long were you planning to hide this from me?" As if summoned by her voice, Booker's eyes fluttered open. When he saw her, relief and guilt warred across his features like opposing armies. "Clara," he said, his voice hoarse from the breathing tube they had recently removed, "you shouldn't be here. The media." "Screw the media," Clara said fiercely, surprising them both with her vehemence. "How long have you known about your heart condition?" Booker's eyes closed, and for a moment, Clara thought he had fallen back asleep. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. 6 months. Maybe longer. The doctors said it was genetic, a defect I inherited from my father, probably what caused his car accident. They've been monitoring it, trying to avoid surgery, but you nearly died tonight," Clara finished, her voice breaking on the words. "The stress of the merger," Booker admitted. 18-hour days, too much caffeine, not enough sleep. My cardiologist warned me to slow down, but there was this deal, and I thought I could push through it." Clara stared at him, love and fury battling in her chest like fire and ice. "You thought you could push through a failing heart?" "Booker, what if I had lost you tonight? What if you had died without me knowing you were in danger?" "I was trying to protect you," Booker said weakly. "From what?" Clara demanded, standing up so abruptly that her chair scraped against the linoleum floor. "From caring about you? From loving you enough to want to help you through this?" The word, love, hung between them like a revelation neither had been brave enough to speak aloud before. Clara realized she had just confessed her deepest truth in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and fear. But somehow it felt exactly right. "You love me?" Booker asked, his voice filled with wonder. "You brilliant idiot," Clara said, tears streaming down her face as she sank back into the chair. "Of course I love you. I've loved you since that first night in the elevator, when you admitted you were afraid of silence. I loved you when you bought me dinner at Murphy's Diner. I loved you when you defended my art to a warehouse full of strangers. And I love you now even though I want to throttle you for keeping this secret." Booker reached for her hand with fingers that felt too cold, too fragile. "I was scared," he admitted. "Not of the surgery or the risks or even dying. I was scared that if you knew how broken I really am, you'd realize you deserved someone whole." Clara's laugh was half sob, half amazement. "Booker, don't you understand? We're all broken. The difference is whether we let someone help us heal or whether we suffer alone." Dr. Stark appeared in the doorway like a guardian angel in scrubs, her expression serious but not hopeless. "Mr. Hale, we need to discuss your surgical options. The procedure we've been avoiding can't be delayed much longer." The next week passed in a blur of medical consultations and surgical preparations. Clara took leave from the community center, refusing to leave Booker's side despite his protests that she was sacrificing her students for his crisis. She slept in hospital chairs, ate vending machine meals, and sketched obsessively in a new notebook, drawing Booker's hands connected to IV lines, the view from his hospital window, the machines that kept him stable while they waited for an operating room to become available. The night before surgery, Clara was dozing in the chair beside Booker's bed, when a gentle touch on her shoulder woke her. Booker was sitting up despite the nurse's orders for bed rest, holding one of her old sketches, the drawing she had made of them laughing together in the elevator during their second encounter. "Where did you get that?" Clara asked, recognizing the piece immediately. "I kept it," Booker said simply. "After you left, I kept everything you ever gave me. This one, got me through the worst nights." Clara's throat tightened as she saw what Booker had added to the drawing. Beneath her original illustration he had written in his careful businessman's script, "If I survive, I want every stuck moment to be with you. If I don't, know you already freed me." "Don't talk like that," Clara said fiercely, taking the drawing with shaking hands. "You're going to survive this surgery, and then we're going to have a very long conversation about communication and trust in relationships." Booker's laugh was weak but genuine. "Is that a promise?" "It's a threat," Clara said, but her smile softened the words. The surgery lasted 8 hours. Clara wore a path in the waiting room carpet, clutching Booker's modified drawing like a talisman. She sketched frantically to keep her hands busy, drawing the other families waiting for news, the doctors moving with purposeful urgency, the way morning light gradually replaced the fluorescent hospital lighting as dawn broke over the city. When Dr. Stark finally emerged from the surgical suite, her smile told Clara everything before words were necessary. "The surgery completely successful," Dr. Stark said, her voice warm with satisfaction. "We corrected the defect and reinforced the damaged areas. With proper recovery and lifestyle changes, Mr. Hale should live a completely normal, healthy life." Clara collapsed back into her chair, relief flooding through her like a dam bursting. She had been holding her breath for 8 hours, and now oxygen felt like a gift she had forgotten how to receive. She was allowed to see him an hour later, when he was conscious enough to recognize her face. Booker's eyes found hers across the recovery room, and his first word was her name, spoken like a prayer of gratitude. "Hey there, survivor," Clara said softly, settling into the chair that had become her second home. "Hey there, beautiful," Booker replied, his voice rough from the breathing tube, but alive with renewed strength. Clara fell asleep holding his hand, her head resting on the hospital bed, the sketch of their elevator laughter pressed between their joined palms. She dreamed of elevators that never broke down, of love stories that survived every test, of hearts that beat in perfect synchronization. 6 months later, Clara stood in the center of the Meridian Towers event space, surrounded by her elevator-themed art collection. Stuck Moments had become the most talked-about gallery opening of the year, not because of scandal or sensation, but because of the raw emotional honesty that breathed life into every piece. Her illustrations lined the walls like windows into parallel universes where elevators became portals, where mechanical failures transformed into magical opportunities, where two people from different worlds discovered that love was the ultimate equalizer. Booker moved through the crowd with renewed vitality, his surgery scar hidden beneath a perfectly tailored shirt, his heart beating strong and steady. He had become her greatest champion, introducing her to collectors and curators, who saw the same magic in her work that he had recognized from the beginning. "Clara," he said, appearing at her elbow as she watched a young girl study her latest piece, an elevator filled with floating hearts instead of buttons. "Could I steal you away for just a moment?" He led her to the actual elevator, the scene of their first encounter, now decorated with fairy lights and transformed into an art installation. But as the doors closed around them, Clara realized this wasn't just another romantic gesture. Booker dropped to one knee, pulling out a small velvet box that contained not a traditional diamond ring, but something far more meaningful. A golden elevator button engraved with delicate script, "Forever with you." "Clara Martinez," Booker said, his voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life getting stuck in elevators with you?" Clara's yes came through tears and laughter, through 6 months of healing and growth, through the knowledge that their love story had survived scandal and secrets, and the ultimate test of mortality. As Booker slipped the ring onto her finger, the elevator gave its familiar gentle sway, not broken this time, but settling into position like a satisfied sigh. "Best accident of my life," Booker whispered against her lips as he kissed her. And Clara knew, with the certainty that comes from surviving everything the universe can throw at two hearts determined to beat as one, that some prisons really do become freedom when you find the right person to be trapped with forever.